I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West. I've got a lot of opinions about social media.
Oh, but you're so good at it.
I don't do it. I mean, okay, so look, we're talking about social media because obviously, 2020, it's kind of a part of
well, I think that's why
lives.
It's funny with my sarcasm again.
Yeah.
And 2020, and maybe you're one of the only professionals I know, can I say that doesn't, that one of the other professionals that doesn't use social media.
Yeah. So I don't, and I won't. I repeat, it's my boundary that I've committed to. But I think maybe what we could do is start off by talking a little bit about, let's start on the effective end. Like, what are the work from a psychological perspective? Like, what are the workable aspects of this type of technology? Like, what do you think?
Well, so I say that it's both man's most ingenious creation and the epitome and downfall of our lives, of the human race. So it's a little bit of an extreme dialectic.
We're gonna get to that second part in a moment.
We're gonna break that down.
But let's start with what's the genius of it? Like, speaking from a psychological perspective, like, why has this invention been useful?
It helps us connect. I mean, I think one thing we've seen in the autism research is that there's really good benefits as tools to drive communication, interpersonal relationships for people that otherwise struggle with it. I think, certainly people have found romance and have led to, so I think I'm not going, and I will say, follow me at official Dr. Pete, because you'll find that there's a pretty decent following, on Instagram in particular, that I think for me, it's also about reaching a larger audience to help eliminate or decrease suffering.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess I'll add in there that social media, in the service of connecting people, it's been extremely powerful in terms of a lot of movements,
Yes.
Of course, I think of like the Arab Spring as an example, right? Of course, what's, in the time of recording this, the power of social media through, using like Black Lives Matter, using it, Color of Change organizations, social justice organizations using it, that I think that there's been that kind of reach that you just don't get by, old fashioned word of mouth. Right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Well, this is the new fashioned word of mouth.
Yeah. It's the new fashioned word of mouth. Yeah. and in a much lighter way, I'm just already laughing thinking this, it's also resulted in being able to share some amazing animal videos.
Oh my God.
Right. I always say, like, all the things that people would be like, my dog does this. You're like, yeah, right. And they're like, video proof.
Nope. Actually does. Well, and so I don't want to jump here. I am jumping to the negative, but I think video proof is also creating a lot of tension socially, whereby you have this movement of #Karen. And when you have these really racist people that are acting out, because I don't want to say it's not a white person necessarily. Oftentimes it is.
Right.
But the bottom line is they're racist people. And when you have those things, and that is instigating and escalating the emotion in that experience. But we'll get there in a second.
But I think that still goes on the workable end, because that comes back to the power of actually, and there's a downside of this with information, which we'll get to, but the power of sharing information, that being able to share, these videos. And of course there's just, I mean, we're seeing some horrible,
so much pain,
and violence.
Well, so there's accountability then, right?
There's accountability. And that, again, that's different than just, talking about it with your neighbor or your family member.
And I've said that it's called like internet muscles. I'm not sure if that's a thing yet, but I was one of my Fox 5 interviews in New York. They talked about just how people are more likely to say something through a social media platform than they are in person. And it's so true. And I talk about that as like internet muscles, where people feel,
internet muscle.
They feel empowered to be able to say something they wouldn't say. But really quick, those animal videos, if you're ever having a down day, hello, just turn to them.
that is honestly like when I'm doing what's called distress, Pete obviously uses this as well, what are called distress tolerance skills, which is another way of, I call it like mindful distraction, like mindfully focusing on something else when you're having a tough time.
Right.
That's like one of the first things I refer patients to. I'll be like, do
Totally.
you like animals? And not everybody does. And if they don't, no judgment, that's fine, moving on. But a lot of people do. And I'm like, just type in golden retriever
But,
puppies.
okay, look, if you don't like animals, then maybe a baby laughing one.
Yes, sure, a baby. Right. There's
something for everybody.
There's something for everybody. So all right. So we're saying that social media obviously has some real benefits, right?
That's right.
That it's given us, access to spreading information in a way that was not previously available to us before. It helps people connect sometimes. I mean, and also, we didn't say this yet, but I also think it's important to say, like, there's emerging research about this, like Generation Z, who's grown up with social media, right? They were born into a time when it already existed, unlike Pete and I,
their birth was publicized on Instagram, probably.
Yes. right. Yeah. That they really know how to navigate it. I mean, I'm always like so impressed with them.
Businesses too, right? Like also thinking about like return on investment for businesses.
Yeah. It's amazing. So as Pete and I talk about with everything, there are advantages and disadvantages to all things. There's a dialectic in everything. There's things that work and things that don't work. And I think it's pretty important to talk about the things that don't work with social media, because these days, I think a lot of people believe that they don't have a choice. Like they've got to be on it. It has to be a part of your life. And I want people to have information about, well, these are the things that don't work about it. So you get to choose. Does it work for you or not? So what do you think what are some of the things that don't work?
Well, research is showing us that it is, it's affecting our sleep.
Yep.
It is increasing anxiety and depression.
And why do you think why is that? Like,
well, for me, I look at that through the social comparison lens, and I do believe that people are just comparing themselves to something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I often find myself using screen time with athletes and really limiting any social media because especially being in like the New York, New Jersey area, our fans are really heavy. And so you are the best person. And in the next moment, you are the worst thing, whereas in other parts of the world, as long as you play for the team that I'm for, no matter what you do, I got your back.
Right.
In this area, not so much. So,
So you got to work on limiting some of that. Right.
You got to limit it. And it's only because it's actually not real. Because that's definitely an example of internet muscle. This person would not say what they're saying to you. And if they were face to face, if they were face to face, they'd be asking for your autograph. They would be saying, could they have a picture with you or with your kid? You know, and then the minute you do something, maybe a bad game or a bad play, it's like, you're dead to them. And that's not healthy for anybody.
No, it's not. And I'm reminded of one of my favorite SNL skits of all time. Like I'm going to laugh talking about it. It's from like 10 years ago. It's, if you Google like SNL skit, Melissa McCarthy, internet trolls, it's like something like that. It's like supposed to be sort of kind of like a game show where they bring people on that are supposed to be internet trolls and like who the person actually is to that point of like,
I have to watch
like
this.
I mean, I watched it again recently. I cry laughing every time because it's just like, it's just these awful things that sometimes people say online that, to your point, would never say out loud. But coming back to the social comparison piece, because you're saying we're seeing increases in depression and anxiety. Absolutely. We have a lot of research, obviously, about comparisons just in general. Think about, we don't need social media to do this, right?
We do not need it.
Human brains are constantly like, where am I in the hierarchy, this hierarchy in quotes here of being a person. And the more that we do that, we feel worse about ourselves, I can't remember exactly where I read the study, but a while ago, probably a few years ago, I read a study that said that the more someone posts about themselves online on social media, that it's negatively correlated with happiness, which what that means is the more someone posts about themselves, the less happy they are, which when I share that with patients, people are shocked.
Yeah.
They're shocked.
Well, and I think their shock factor is this delusional perspective that we all have about what people are posting. I mean, you and I had a colleague. Like,
they look amazing. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, you and I had a colleague, and it was really funny because I love that she said that, because she was like, look, what I really want to post is I'm so pissed at my husband right now. My 2 kids, I can't stand at this moment. I just want to hide in the bathroom for like 30 minutes of peace and quiet. And who's really posting that?
Right. No,
and I felt like that was just so real. And honestly, so that was like however many years ago. And I felt like 10 years ago-ish.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
like that, think about where we've come in 10 years with social media. So I think for me, that was like a moment of like, oh yeah, people are not posting the real stuff. And it was a reality for me about 10 years ago to think about that. Cause you don't, this is the only point, honestly, right now with social media, this is probably the only contact that people have with people is just what they're scrolling on a screen.
Right. Right. And I think what I always find interesting is that, people will say to me, like, I know it's not real,
Right.
but it makes me feel bad. And what I want to explain to people, and this is actually one of the main reasons I don't do social media, is I'll say, like, look, I'm a psychologist, like, right? Like I devoted my life to studying this stuff. I have a human brain. So yes, I might rationally understand that what's being presented is fake, right? And the comparison part of my brain is going to say, but like, you don't have that perfect life. Like, what's wrong with you, Nikki? Like, why aren't you doing this?
That's right.
And so, for me, that's where that's a boundary that I just put up for myself. I'm just, I also always say, props. Oh, well, thank you. But it's also, I don't think there's anything wrong with using social media. It's like, to me, it's just like, that's what works for me.
That's your value.
Well, and it's also just, to be honest, like I have a sensitive brain, right? Like that. I always share with people too, like, because of what I do, I hold the lives of other people, a lot of other people in my mind, like a lot of information. And I feel like I don't have any more room for like superfluous information from other people's lives.
And so even though I said my official Dr. Pete, which there's another plug, I'm not on it often. And I will also share that if you go on my clinical website, you'll notice that I have a social media director. And that's not because I'm even big at what I do at all. That's why I joke about politically when we think like, so like, this senator or this congressperson is like tweeting. I'm like, well, I'm not even doing all my own tweets. So it's highly unlikely that these people that are like really sort of influential are. But I think that I want to also share that like, the content is something that she and I discuss, but we maybe talk like once every month or two, maybe.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's important because I'm with you on that. I recognize that we can only take so much. And I don't think it's necessarily about being a psychologist. I want to pat you on the back virtually, but I also want to say, I think just being human, I think your awareness. So I think your psychologist training has you maybe more self-aware to recognize when you can have and when you've reached capacity. And I think that's really what's happening in the world is that people don't have that.
No, that's right. And also, what makes it so difficult is that, again, going back to dorky brain stuff here, the way social media is designed, it's like a dopamine shot to the brain, right? It's like hitting the pleasure center of our brain the same way, substances or gambling works. It's like, it's colorful. It's like immediate reinforcement, because I also get a lot of patients, and I'm curious here if you hear this as well, that say to me, again, it's like the shoulds, like, I know I shouldn't be on it, but like, I can't help myself. And I'll say
it's addicting.
Because it's addicting. I'm like, your brain is being reinforced in these ways. Like, it's just, it's like eating, it's like eating potato chips, right? It's just like,
Oreos.
You might not, right. Pete and I love Oreos and Domino's. Yes. Which
for another episode.
That's for another episode. I know. I was just, I got yelled at a lot when I lived in New York for that, but I was like, I'm sorry, I love it. I can't help myself.
Yell all you want.
Yeah. I was like,
glutton for that.
Yes. But you know what I mean? It's just like, it's short-term reinforcing, even though it doesn't make us feel good overall.
Well, and that's why it's affecting sleep. The research shows us that even when we shut the phone off, our brain for about 45 minutes after still feels like it's scrolling on that feed. And that's just because the activity of these, like the hippocampus, the learning areas, or just the sensory areas of our brain remain activated and still are processing the information. And it takes about 45 minutes. So that's why phones out of the bedroom, it should not be the last thing people look at before they go to bed. It is one of the most detrimental things that phones have done. Absolutely. I will say that like adamantly, but I do think that as long as we can create boundaries around the use of it, then there are the powerful sort of benefits that one can reap from it, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, and I think we can't do this episode without talking about the multitude of non-factual information available to us in social media and the internet, right? So if you guys,
well, and that's like so new. Who even knows about that?
I know. So so if you guys listen to the podcast a lot, you hear Pete and I dork out about about facts and data all the
Mhm.
time. We're really into facts and data. And we live in an era where opinions and beliefs have taken
Yeah.
over as the dominant lens through which we try to experience the world.
So you won't even get this because you're not on social media. But the other day, I
Uh-huh.
was on the internet Googling septic tanks. So for anyone that doesn't live in a rural area, you need to, septic tanks are things where all your water and waste goes.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And the minute I went back on like that night into Facebook and Instagram, the first ads that popped up were for septic tank
I mean,
companies.
this is where I get all like Big Brother 1984
Absolutely.
stuff,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, hello, there it
Yes.
is.
Yes. Well, so okay, so that's like another aspect here, right? Is like just like that we're the
Well, that's the same
tracking and
algorithm that's happening with these like think tanks of like
right
the
of like
political news
what
stuff.
people right. So what people
Correct.
post, right? So then it's just funneling
Right.
your
So if I
like
post Trump is the best thing ever, I'm going to be funneled stories related to Trump and the Republican Party. If I
right,
post like, hey, vote for Biden, I'm going to be funneled. So we're
right.
then polarizing the knowledge and information that we're receiving. So this is a really good point.
And it's so I find it's so distressing to me, honestly,
Yeah.
because you know it's there let me say this, we all have our own beliefs and opinions, and there's nothing wrong with that
Hmm.
you know, beliefs and opinions are, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of a funny way to say it, but they're colorful sometimes, right? Like they're
Yeah.
interesting, you know. This is like, you know, if
I
you
love
read,
that. No, I
yeah,
love that. They're
you wouldn't want,
colorful.
they're colorful, like, right, you wouldn't want to read a fiction book that was just data. It would be very
Yeah.
boring, right? That
No.
it's like lends itself to beautiful language and
Hmm.
interesting viewpoints, and obviously learning about different perspectives and points of view is actually very helpful
That's
to
right.
our development and our evolution. But this idea that all information available on the internet is facts is just totally wrong. And
That's right.
people and social media, like, so this, we're talking about the benefits of the quick sharing and this far reach, but that goes for information that's not true,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
So, you know, how do
And I
you
don't think you and I, let's just be
no, go
clear,
ahead.
you and
Yeah.
I are certainly not experts in this. You know, I mean,
Yes,
neither of
yeah.
us have degrees in computer science.
No, we
I
don't.
use the word algorithm, I can hardly spell it. So I don't really know fully what that means, but I
Well,
do.
you do well, but you do. I think yes, and thank you for saying that. That is important. And you know, we're here talking about, like, as clinicians and psychologists, like, what
Yes.
the negative impact is on this. And you know, what's coming to my mind now is I'm wondering, like, what do you think, like, an Eastern perspective would be on social media? Like, what do you like? What would I mean?
Well, certainly in terms of the eightfold path, it's probably not right action or right speech or right mindfulness, because I do think in terms of these tunnels, everyone listening and everyone knows somebody and or themselves have gone down a rabbit hole of the social
Yeah.
media hole.
Oh yeah.
Everyone, we've all done it.
Everyone. Oh
We've
yeah.
all done it. And so I think we can get, that's not an Eastern practice, because
Right.
you know, awareness doesn't allow us to get into the hole. And even I've gone down the hole, I just probably recognize it a little bit quicker than maybe some other
Right.
folks, where
What,
if I'm being pulled to it, I pull right
you
myself
pull,
out.
so you mindfully come back and you recognize
Correct.
what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, if, you know, before we wrap up in a moment here, I think that uh, that would be helpful to sort of share some other behavioral tools that you use or share with patients about how to interrupt that behavior. Well, so one, interrupt the rabbit hole behavior, and two, actually set some boundaries around social media so that people have more choice about how they want to interact with it.
I think it's easy with screen time. So I think that the apps and the phones have developed this because they've had to, because the other science that I'm not smart enough to even talk about is
It's not true.
apps were
You are.
developed to keep people engaged based on
That's right.
color,
That's
based
right.
on
Yes.
clicking.
Well,
And
that's the
so
dopamine shot I keep
there's the
talking about.
dopamine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so people, you know, so I think notice your dopamine, right? You know, notice when
Yeah.
it's like you're feeling pulled to it. Right, mindfulness is just then go do something like that you enjoy, like petting your dog or going for a walk, meditating. But again, I think if you can just set boundaries and behavioral limitations to usage, that's going to be one of the most effective strategies I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add to that it's okay to take a break, you know, like you know, we're recording this during the time of the pandemic, and that's been one of my main homework assignments is get off social media, like turn it off for a week. I mean, really, I know that some people, that sounds like a million years, will say, just do a little detox, give your brain a rest, and, get a little more clear about it. So I think, with that, we can just let people know that social media is a part of our lives. We radically accept that, and you have a choice about how you interact with it. This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes only.